high heels crushing my soybean sprouts, a caterer demanding I move my tractor because it was ruining the ambience. That's when I flipped the switch and the manure spreaders thundered to life. Cut to title screen. How do we end up here? Let's rewind 3 months to a simpler time when I naively believed that basic human decency still existed. I assumed people, regardless of their obsession with homeowner associations or their preference for electric scooters, would at least ask before leeching off my electricity. I had just moved into my suburban retreat, a quiet corner lot, a spacious backyard, and neighbors who seemed decent enough. There was even a single outdoor outlet near my walkway, meant for holiday decorations and the occasional e-bike charge. Nothing special. I wasn't overly social, but I did my part. I waved at the neighbors. I kept my driveway clear in the winter. I even tolerated the HOA's ridiculous 6-page handbook on proper mailbox hues and acceptable garbage placement. Then Karen showed up. It started subtly. The first time I noticed the scooter parked by my hedge, plugged into my outdoor outlet, I assumed it was a one-time thing. The cord snaked lazily through the bushes, as if it had grown there overnight. I figured maybe someone needed a quick charge and had forgotten to unplug. So I unplugged it, coiled the cord neatly, and moved on. The next day it was back. Same scooter, same outlet. This time I waited. About an hour later, Karen rolled around the corner, a reusable shopping bag in one hand and a tiny dog in the other. One of those pocket-sized yappers that looked like it ran on rechargeable batteries. She strolled up, casually unplugged her scooter, and prepared to leave. So, as neutrally as possible, I said, "Hey, just wondering, did you ask anyone before plugging in?" She blinked, tilting her head slightly, as if I had accused her of grand theft auto. "Oh, I didn't think I needed to," she said, her voice an infuriating mix of cheerful and patronizing. "It's just a little charge." She gestured vaguely toward my house. Since the outlet's near the sidewalk, it's technically public-facing. I blinked. I had read the HOA guidelines front to back, and nowhere did it state that an exterior outlet suddenly became a community charging station. It was still my property, my electricity, my bill. Karen just smiled, waved as if we were best friends, and rolled away. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't, because like clockwork, that scooter appeared daily, sometimes twice a day. She even had the nerve to plug in while I was home, flashing me a casual wave through the window like we were splitting utilities. My electric bill crept higher. My breaker tripped twice. I reported it to the HOA, expecting some sort of intervention. Their response? If the outlet is not visibly marked as private or secured, it may be assumed to be accessible. No warning for Karen. No fine. No resolution. Just a helpful suggestion that I install a lock if it really bothered me. That's when I knew I was on my own. I started keeping records, logging every charge, taking photos, even installing a motion-activated camera aimed directly at the outlet. My inner introvert loathed the escalation, but my deep-seated hatred for freeloaders demanded action. And then the sprinkler incident happened. I had a simple irrigation setup, just enough to keep my lawn from resembling a barren wasteland. Nothing excessive. One morning, I stepped outside and immediately noticed something was off. A fresh gash marred my hedge, as if something had bulldozed through it. The grass had been ripped up in deep tracks, and one of my sprinkler heads lay snapped off. And wouldn't you know it, Karen's scooter had fresh mud streaks on the wheels, along with a stray leaf lodged in the frame. That afternoon, I confronted her. She barely looked at the damage before shrugging. "Oh, I thought it was dead grass," she said, her voice breezy with zero remorse. "It didn't look like it was doing much. You should really water more." I stared at her, my eye twitching, and then she smiled, that smug, patronizing smile that screamed, "I get away with everything, and there's nothing you can do about it." That night, I called Vince. Vince was an electrician. More importantly, Vince was the kind of friend who didn't just solve problems. He engineered poetic justice. I explained the situation, fully expecting him to suggest a locked outlet cover. Instead, I heard the smirk in his voice. "You want legal, or you want fun?" I asked why I couldn't have both. Turns out I could. That Saturday, we rewired my outdoor circuit to run through a dedicated breaker, one completely separate from the rest of my house. Still entirely legal. still entirely on my property. No tampering with Karen's scooter or wiring. Vince also installed a smart plug that tracked power usage, a kill switch, and one very satisfying addition. A small adjustment to the circuit that ensured any time Karen plugged in, it would trigger a minor power surge, one that tripped only her connection. My house. Completely unaffected. Her house. Instant blackout if she tried to pull too much power. And the best part? No visible interference. The trap was set. The first time she plugged in after our rewiring, I stood inside, sipping my coffee, watching the live camera feed on my phone. Scooter rolled up. Plug inserted. 10 seconds later, click. My system detected the power draw. A faint hum ran through the wall. 30 seconds later, her house across the street went dark, as if someone had yanked the plug on reality. Porch light? Gone. Interior lights? Blipped out like a dying firefly. From my window, I watched as Karen stumbled out, waving her arms in confusion like she was fending off invisible bats. Then the real show began. Karen stormed outside, her power flickering weakly behind her, and made a beeline for my outlet. She stared at it, hands on her hips, like it had personally insulted her. I sipped my coffee. Unplug. Plug back in. Stomp foot. Mutter something under her breath. Roll back inside. 5 minutes later, her lights flickered back on. 10 minutes later, she tried again. Click. Boom. Out again. And because this was Karen we were dealing with, she did what only Karen would do. She called the police. Yes, she actually did. She told them I was somehow weaponizing my electricity against her, that I had rigged my outlet to target her specifically, that I was retaliating against a senior citizen with mobility needs. When the officer arrived, his face said he knew he had walked straight into a sitcom. I handed him everything: security footage, usage logs, my conversations with the HOA, and even my electrician certification proving that everything on my property was completely legal. Karen, of course, attempted to argue that her scooter was an accessibility device and therefore had the right to plug in anywhere. The officer just raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, did you have permission to use this outlet?" Karen blinked. Then, with all the confidence of someone who never faces consequences, she said, "Well, it's not like he told me I couldn't." The officer nodded slowly. "So, no permission?" That sentence unlocked something I had been waiting for. Because now, I had legal grounds to escalate this further. Not just blocking access, but officially filing a complaint for trespassing and theft of service. And since the HOA had previously sided with her, I had no intention of taking this back to them. No, this was going straight to the HOA board president, who, conveniently, was returning from medical leave next week. A board president who, according to neighborhood lore, loathed Karen with the kind of deep, unshakable resentment usually reserved for termites in tax season. And, wouldn't you know it, Karen just happened to be planning a major event that weekend. Tents, music, a whole lot of guests. The timing was perfect. I won't lie. Watching Karen's house go dark every time she tried to mooch off my power was one of the most deeply satisfying things I've ever witnessed. The confusion, the frustration, the moment when her entire ego short-circuited right along with her living room lights. It was art, but that was only phase one. Because when someone like Karen gets embarrassed, they don't self-reflect. They don't apologize. They escalate. And she did exactly that. The next morning, there was a knock at my door, not the aggressive, I'm about to lose it kind, but the overly polite kind. The passive-aggressive smile disguising barely contained rage kind. I opened the door to find Karen standing there, her tiny dog tucked under one arm, sunglasses perched atop her head like she was about to file a complaint with a Starbucks barista. She got straight to the point. "Hi there," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "I just wanted to check. Something seems wrong with your outlet. My scooter keeps shorting out when I plug it in." I smiled. "Oh yeah? Could be. I had some electrical work done recently. Might be a bit more sensitive now." She tilted her head. "Right, well, it was working just fine before." "Was it?" I asked, pretending to think really hard. Funny, my electric bill didn't seem to agree. Her jaw tightened, just slightly, before she adjusted her sunglasses and gave a clipped nod. "I'll bring it up with the HOA," she said. "Please do," I replied, all too cheerfully. I have plenty of documentation ready. And I did. Every instance of her unauthorized charging. Every spike in power consumption. Footage. Timestamp logs. And, thanks to my electrician buddy Vince, detailed data from the smart plug proving the difference between my baseline power usage and what happened whenever her scooter was plugged in. It wasn't just petty evidence. It was admissible. And it was a good thing, too, because Karen followed through on her threat. Sort of. Later that week, I received a notice from the HOA. Not a violation, but an official request to attend a discussion regarding accessibility concerns raised by a neighbor. The language was vague, but the intent was clear. Karen had once again tried to play the disability card, framing me as some kind of villain for restricting access to community resources, which, in reality, was just a fancy way of saying he won't let me steal his electricity anymore. But she had made a mistake. She assumed the HOA was still under her influence. What she didn't realize was that our actual HOA president, Samantha, was back. And Samantha? Samantha did not suffer fools. I arrived at the meeting with every piece of evidence in hand. Karen was already there, sitting stiffly in a folding chair, her expression painted with faux victimhood. The moment she spotted me, she smiled, wide, forced, calculated. Samantha, however, didn't even look at her. She simply gestured for me to sit and said, "Let's make this quick." Karen launched into a theatrical speech about mobility challenges, limited access to power, and how the community should be more accommodating to seniors. At no point did she claim she had permission to use my outlet. She simply implied that it was practically public property and that I was personally targeting her. For dramatic effect, she even produced a letter from her chiropractor stating that repeated power disruptions were exacerbating her spinal misalignment. I had to physically restrain myself from laughing. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply handed Samantha a thumb drive. On it, security footage, power logs, my conversations with the HOA, the electrician's compliance report, documentation of the sprinkler she destroyed. Then, I said simply, "This isn't about mobility. It's about boundaries. She's been using my electricity without permission for over 2 months. She damaged my property. The HOA did nothing. So I took legal precautions on my property, and now she's dealing with the natural consequences." Samantha barely reacted. She reviewed the footage, nodded occasionally, then turned to Karen. "You never had permission to use his outlet." Karen opened her mouth, closed it, then, finally, in a voice far smaller than before, muttered, "I assume." "No," Samantha cut her off. And just like that, the meeting was over. Karen stormed out, muttering something about unneighborly behavior. Meanwhile, I smiled, knowing this was far from over, because her big event was still coming up, and I had just submitted a formal complaint about her multiple HOA violations. Let's just say, her little soiree was about to hit a few unexpected power issues. Samantha simply turned to me and said, "If she tries it again, let me know. We'll issue a formal violation." For a brief moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, this was the end of it. But Karen being Karen, she didn't back down. No, if she couldn't leech power from me quietly, she'd just do it loudly. Which brings us to the wedding tent. I came home one afternoon to find an enormous white canopy dominating the back portion of my property. Not my front yard, not the sidewalk. Nope, the literal back edge of my land, right in the middle of my soybean field. Apparently, Karen's niece, or goddaughter, or second cousin twice removed, who knows, was having a rustic chic country wedding. And, in true Karen fashion, she had promised the event company access to a perfect open space. Never mind that she didn't own that space. Never mind that she had pounded a dozen metal stakes into my soil. Never mind that she had trampled through my crops, dragging folding chairs behind her like some sort of budget-friendly Godzilla. And the icing on the cake? Her caterer walked over and asked me if I could move my parked tractor because it ruined the aesthetic. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just smiled, nodded, and excused myself to the shed. Because if Karen thought temporarily cutting her power was rude, then she clearly had no idea what my trusty John Deere could do with 2 fully loaded manure spreaders and perfectly timed ignition. The next morning, Just as the string quartet was warming up, I flipped the switch. Both spreaders roared to life. The edges of my field, aka Karen's little borrowed venue, were suddenly engulfed in a fine, unmistakably pungent mist. Cue immediate chaos. Karen came sprinting across the property in full meltdown mode, sequin dress glittering in the sunlight, shouting about permits, sanitation violations, and how I was ruining everything. I simply pointed to the property line and said, "See that? That's mine. And that part with the cow crap? Also mine." By sundown, the tent was gone. The wedding? Relocated to a nearby park. And Karen? Karen tried to file a harassment complaint. It went nowhere. Samantha shut it down immediately. "You trespassed, Karen," she told her flatly. "You're lucky he didn't press charges. You'd think that would be the lesson she needed. You'd think she'd finally accept defeat. But no, she doubled down. First, she started cozying up to the neighbors, asking for rides because her precious scooter had become unreliable. Then, she spread rumors that I had sabotaged her power supply. And finally, in one last desperate bid for dominance, she installed a bright pink sign next to my outlet that read, "Property of Karen, do not tamper." I nearly applauded the audacity. And then, late one night, she tried one last time. I was watching the camera feed when it happened. She had waited until well past midnight, likely assuming I was asleep. The scooter rolled up. She crouched, fumbling in the dark, and plugged it in. The moment the cord connected, my smart plug detected the pull. A quiet hum vibrated through the wall. Then, boom. Her porch light flickered once, and the entire front of her house went dark. But this time, the power didn't come back. Not after 10 seconds. Not after 5 minutes. Not even after an hour. Karen came stumbling outside, flashlight in hand, looking visibly shaken. And then, from across the street, another neighbor shouted, "Hey, Karen, you knocked out your garage again." She didn't respond. She didn't need to, because at that moment I knew my little wiring tweak had finally pushed her janky, overloaded system past the breaking point. And she had no idea what was coming next. The next morning began with a bang. Literally, a loud pop echoed from Karen's garage, followed by a sharp, fizzing sound and a delicate little plume of smoke curling into the sky. I sat on my porch, sipping my coffee, watching the inevitable unfold. Karen came bursting out of her house in full catastrophe mode, bathrobe half-tied, curlers bouncing, tiny dog yapping in solidarity. She was staring at the garage like it had personally betrayed her, pointing and muttering like she was about to issue a formal complaint to the building itself. Turns out, her last charging session had fried her external breaker. Not enough to be dangerous, just enough to knock out. Heavy check mark, her garage. Heavy check mark, her porch light. Heavy check mark, most of her front-facing electrical. Which meant, crossmark, no security cameras. Crossmark, no motion lights. Crossmark garage door, stuck half open like a mechanical yawn. I watched as she frantically called for an electrician, pacing in and out of her yard while barking into her phone. When the electrician finally arrived, he poked around for all of 10 minutes before stepping back, shaking his head with the same exasperated disbelief I had seen on Vince's face weeks earlier. The look of a professional staring into the abyss of wiring decisions that should never have existed. Eventually, the electrician packed up, left Karen holding an outrageous bill, and drove off without fixing anything. By that afternoon, 2 different neighbors had texted me. One simply sent a laughing emoji. The other asked, "Did you finally snap and take her grid out with a vengeance?" I didn't confirm. I didn't deny. I simply posted a picture of my fully functioning porch light with a caption, "Fully charged. Hot beverage." That night, the HOA group chat erupted. Karen had officially gone nuclear. She posted a lengthy rant, claiming she was being systematically targeted by an unnamed neighbor using electrical warfare. She attached a series of blurry screenshots, taken on what I assume was a 2005 flip phone, along with dramatic accusations of sabotage, discrimination, and a coordinated effort to remove mobility-challenged residents from the community. And, of course, she demanded immediate action from the HOA board to address this hostile electrical conspiracy. But there was one little detail she wasn't aware of. Her reign over the HOA was over. Because Samantha? Samantha didn't just side with me. She decided to make an example out of Karen. Within 24 hours, an official notice was sent out to every resident. A mandatory HOA board meeting was scheduled to address recent violations, unauthorized power usage, and false claims of public utility ownership. The wording was polite. The intent was not. Karen arrived at that meeting looking ready for battle, a binder clutched under her arm, a neck brace strapped around her like she had just barely survived an electrical assassination attempt. And oh, if only she knew what was coming next. I had to admire the sheer commitment, almost. When the meeting began, Samantha didn't waste time. We've received multiple complaints regarding unauthorized use of private property, damage to landscaping, and repeated trespassing, she announced, her tone sharp and professional. We also have formal documentation submitted, including surveillance footage, electrical usage logs, and professional assessments. Karen, would you like to respond before we review the evidence? Karen stood up, cleared her throat like she was about to deliver the performance of a lifetime, and launched into what I can only describe as the Oscar-worthy suburban victim monologue of the year. She claimed she had relied on the kindness of her neighbors to maintain her mobility, and that I had set up a malicious electrical trap specifically designed to disable her home. She waved a letter from a chiropractor, which looked suspiciously like something copy-pasted from a random online template, and explained how the power outages were part of an orchestrated campaign of intimidation. She even accused me of planting manure on her lawn. Then, in a truly inspired twist, she alleged that I was hiding a generator inside my hedges to fake power fluctuations in her house. I didn't say a word, didn't even blink. I just handed Samantha a USB drive. She plugged it in. The screen flickered to life. Clip after clip played, footage of Karen repeatedly plugging into my outlet. Screenshots of my smart plug logs proving the electrical surges at exact timestamps. Footage of her scooter rolling away every single time after draining my electricity. A photo of my destroyed sprinkler head. A detailed technical breakdown from Vince explaining exactly how the circuit overload affected her power, without once touching mine. By the time the last clip ended, the room was dead silent. Samantha turned to Karen. For a moment, I thought maybe she'd go easy on her. Then, in a calm, even voice, she said, "You repeatedly used another resident's property without permission. You caused damage. You escalated to slander. And you misrepresented yourself as a board authority while the HOA president was on leave. This is not a disability issue. This is a boundaries issue. And you have violated every single one." Karen's face twitched. She fumbled for her binder like it contained some magical last-minute rebuttal. But Samantha simply held up a hand. Enough. And just like that, it was over. The verdict came down before the next coffee break. Heavy checkmark Karen was ordered to pay restitution for her electricity usage, not just to me, but to two other neighbors who had come forward with their own stories of mysteriously draining outlets. Heavy checkmark, she was officially banned from using any exterior outlets that weren't on her property. Heavy checkmark, she was permanently removed from the HOA board. Heavy checkmark, and, in a poetic final touch, the HOA passed a new bylaw. All personal outdoor outlets must be clearly marked and locked. Any unauthorized use would now be treated as trespassing. Karen didn't say a single word for the rest of the meeting. She just sat there, completely drained, like someone had yanked her charger straight out of her soul. I watched her leave, wheeling her scooter away manually, feet pushing against the pavement like a grumpy toddler on a plastic tricycle. The neck brace? It mysteriously came off before she even reached her driveway. At first, it seemed like the neighborhood had finally had enough. No more polite nods when Karen rolled by. No more bless her heart pity. Even the sweet elderly couple across the street, who once baked her cookies, now pulled their porch plug inside every single night. For a while, I thought that was the end of it. Sweet, clean closure. But then, the rumors started. Karen wasn't taking the loss quietly. She was planning something. One last stand. A final attempt to reclaim her imaginary throne. And in true Karen fashion, it came in the most laughably absurd way possible. She installed her own outlet. Not just any outlet, A bright pink, exposed extension cord that ran from her garage window, duct taped to a fence post. At the base, a tiny solar panel, no bigger than a cafeteria tray, angled just so, as if she truly believed it could provide a limitless source of power. The next day, her scooter sat beneath it, basking in what she must have imagined was the triumphant glow of independence. Except, the solar panel barely powered a flashlight. The scooter stayed dead, and by sunset, the extension cord shorted out completely, causing a loud electrical pop that sent her tiny dog sprinting straight into the neighbor's koi pond. I stood on my porch, watching the chaos unfold. Karen yelling at her dog, the neighbor yelling at Karen, the solar panel dangling from the fence like a sad, deflated balloon. And for a single, perfect moment, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced since the day I moved in. But deep down, I knew Karen wasn't done. Not yet. Because people like Karen don't quit. They just regroup. And the next chapter? Well, that's when she tried to make herself the victim. Not just in the neighborhood, but to the entire internet. It started with a TikTok. I wasn't even the one who found it. My cousin sent me a link at midnight with nothing but a laughing emoji and the words, "Is this your scooter witch?" I clicked, and there she was, sitting in her half-lit garage, neck braced back on, staring somberly into her phone camera like she was filming a hostage video. She called herself a disabled senior, a victim of suburban abuse, a survivor of what she dramatically labeled an intentional energy blockade enforced by ableist neighbors and corrupt HOA leadership. I watched in silent horror as she spun an entirely fictional version of events. In her version, I had installed a booby-trap power system to fry her medical equipment. The HOA was in on it. She had been left without power for weeks as punishment for standing up for inclusivity. The comments section? Exactly what you'd expect. Heavy checkmarks, some people bought it. Keyboard warriors who assume every elderly person with a dog and a sob story must be telling the truth. Crossmark, most of them didn't. Within minutes, skeptical locals recognized the neighborhood and started poking holes in her story in real time. One user posted, "Girl, you drove that scooter onto my lawn last year," and "Knocked over my flamingo sit down." Another found her property records and commented, "You own 3 vehicles and a hot tub stop pretending you live off batteries." I admit I laughed a lot, but part of me knew this wasn't just another Karen meltdown. This was a last-ditch effort to reverse public opinion, to reclaim her narrative, and, unfortunately, it started gaining traction outside our neighborhood. Local news outlets love stories like this. All it takes is the right headline: "Elderly woman claims neighbors cut her power in HOA dispute," the kind of thing people click on between weather reports and car dealership ad, and sure enough, a low tier local channel picked it up. They didn't interview her or visit the neighborhood. They just played clips from her video over generic footage of power lines and neighborhood signs, slapped in some royalty-free, sad music, and aired it as filler on the weekend report. No names, no addresses, but everyone around here knew exactly who it was about. I figured it would die out on its own, that the story would fade, people would get bored, and Karen would finally run out of steam. But then she tried to escalate again, this time by inviting a journalist to her property to film a follow-up. And by journalist, I mean a guy with a YouTube channel, a neckbeard, and a drone license. I spotted them setting up in her front yard on a Saturday afternoon. Karen had a lawn chair thrown, the scooter parked beside her like a loyal STE, and her dog wearing a vest that said "Emotional Support Assistant" in Comic Sans. I don't think the guy asked a single real question. He just nodded, made concerned noises, and got drone footage of her half-working garage and pink extension cord. She pointed toward my house multiple times, and though she didn't say my name, she called me the aggressor, the energy tyrant, and at one point the porch-dwelling hacker. Now, I could have ignored all this, let her spiral, but I was tired of the lies, the theatrics, the nonstop entitlements, so I posted a reply, not a video, just a screenshot my power bill before and after her outlet theft, with a caption that read, "She says she couldn't afford her own power. She stole mine every day." Here proof, it went mildly viral, not huge, not millions, but enough for people to start asking questions in her comments enough for the guy who posted the original story to quietly delete it. Enough for the drone YouTuber to issue a correction in the form of a pinned comment. It's come to my attention there are conflicting details. I encourage everyone to do their own research, which is code for I'm messed up and I'm backing away slow SLLY that should have been the final nail. But Karen had one more card to play. She filed a complaint with the city. A real one claimed I had installed unlicensed electrical traps designed to cause outages and sabotage elderly residents. It triggered a formal inspection. I got a visit from a city code enforcement officer, clipboard in hand, asking to see the modifications I had made. I walked him around, explained everything, showed permits, showed receipts, even had Vince write a statement verifying the work was up to code and fully legal. The officer, to his credit, seemed annoyed that he'd even been called out. She said, "You rig it to explode," he muttered, flipping through his checklist. "If I had, don't you think her house would be gone?" I replied. He chuckled. "Check the last box, you're fine, consider this closed." And that finally was the real end, because Karen didn't just lose the neighborhood, she lost the city's patience. After the false report, she got a warning letter, official city documentation for filing a frivolous complaint. One more, they said, and she could face a fine. The HOA, of course, issued their own follow-up, barring her from contacting external agencies about neighbors without first submitting internal evidence, which translated from bureaucratic language: keep your drama inside the fence. Karen tried to play victim a few more times, but the crowd was gone. Her 15 minutes had passed, and the internet had moved on to something newer, shinier, and probably involving Kat. The TikTok video was quietly deleted. Her YouTube martyr saga capped out at 700 views and a bunch of downvote. She started walking her dog at night instead of the day, and that scooter, it disappeared completely. I'd like to say I learned a great moral lesson through all of this, that I came out a better person or more understanding of people's flaws. But the truth is I didn't. What I learned is that some people will take every inch you give them and then claim you owe them a mile, that if you want peace in suburbia, sometimes you need a little war first. That cameras, documentation, and a smart plug can do more than 1,000 arguments ever could. But most importantly, I learned that standing your ground doesn't always mean confrontation. Sometimes it just means flipping the right switch at the right time and letting the circuits and consequences do the talking. A few weeks after everything died down, I had a cookout. Nothing fancy, just burgers, some music, and a few neighbors I'd barely spoken to before. Turns out nothing bonds a community quite like collectively surviving. A Karen people came by, asked about the outlet saga, shared their own petty grievances. One guy said Karen once accused his Christmas lights of giving her migraines. Another claimed she reported his bird feeder for being too enthusiastic. We laughed, we grilled, and as the sun set, I looked across the street. Karen's house was dark, not ominous, just quiet the way I liked it. No cords stretching across property lines, no scooter humming at the edge of my lawn, just the gentle flicker of my own porch light, steady and uninterrupted. And that's why I always lock my outlet and keep the receipt.